Some people say family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, that your siblings are supposed to be your protectors, your allies, the ones who have your back no matter what. I used to believe that too. My name is Cream Johnson, and I'm about to tell you a story that will shatter everything you think you know about loyalty, betrayal, and justice. This isn't some dramatic movie plot or cautionary tale you read in a magazine. This is my life. The moment everything changed in the span of 3 seconds on a staircase in suburban Massachusetts, and the unbelievable chain of events that followed. Because when your own brother pushes you down a flight of stairs and leaves you with a spinal cord injury, you don't just lose the ability to walk. You lose your innocence. You lose your trust. And sometimes you discover a strength you never knew existed. This is the story of how my brother thought he could destroy me, and how karma came for him in ways neither of us could have ever imagined.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Growing up in the Johnson household in Newton, Massachusetts, I learned early on that life wasn't fair. Not in the philosophical sense that adults love to preach about, but in the very tangible, everyday reality of watching your older brother get everything while you got the leftovers. My brother's name was Derek. Derek Michael Johnson. Even his name sounded important, like it belonged on a brass nameplate in some corporate office. He was 3 years older than me, and from the moment I was born, it was clear that he resented sharing the spotlight. Our parents, Richard and Patricia Johnson, were successful real estate developers who'd built a small empire buying and flipping properties throughout the Boston suburbs. They were the kind of people who measured success in square footage and profit margins, and they raised Derek to be just like them, ambitious, competitive, ruthless. I was 22 years old when everything happened, fresh out of Boston University with a degree in graphic design and dreams of starting my own creative agency. Derek was 25, already working at our parents' company with a fancy title, Vice President of Acquisitions. It was a joke, really. He'd been handed the position the moment he graduated, no experience required. But here's the thing nobody tells you about golden children. They're golden because someone else has to be dull by comparison. That someone was me. I wasn't interested in real estate. I didn't want to spend my life talking about market trends and property values and zoning regulations. I wanted to create, to design, to make things beautiful. But in the Johnson family, art wasn't a career, it was a hobby. A phase. Something you'd eventually grow out of once you came to your senses. Cream, honey, be realistic, my mother would say over dinner, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her wine glass. Graphic design is so competitive. Why struggle when you could have a guaranteed position with us? She doesn't have the head for business anyway. Not everyone can handle the pressure. I'd learned to tune them out. I'd gotten good at nodding politely while making my own plans. I'd saved up money from freelance projects, found a tiny studio apartment in Cambridge, and was preparing to move out of our family's sprawling colonial house in Newton. That's when things got complicated. Our grandmother, my father's mother, Eleanor Johnson, passed away that spring. She was 91 years old, sharp as a tack until the very end, and the only person in the family who'd ever really understood me. While everyone else saw my art as frivolous, Grandma Eleanor had commissioned me to design things for her. Birthday invitations, holiday cards, even a beautiful logo for the charity foundation she ran. "You have a gift, Cream," she'd told me once, holding my hand in her papery grip. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The world needs beauty just as much as it needs buildings." I didn't expect her to leave me anything substantial in her will. I figured maybe she'd left me some jewelry or perhaps a small monetary gift. What I didn't expect was for her lawyer to call me into his downtown Boston office on a rainy Tuesday in April and tell me that Grandma Eleanor had left me her property in Cape Cod. Not just any property, a gorgeous 3-acre estate in Chatham with a main house, a guest cottage, and direct beach access. The property was worth at least $2 million. I was stunned. Derek was furious. "This is ridiculous," he had shouted during the family meeting at the lawyer's office, his face turning that particular shade of red it got when he didn't get his way. "Cream doesn't know the first thing about managing property. This should go to someone who understands real estate." "Your grandmother's wishes were very clear," the lawyer had said calmly. "The property goes to Cream with the stipulation that it cannot be sold for at least 5 years. Miss Johnson can live in it, rent it out, or leave it vacant, but she maintains full ownership." My father had been quiet, which somehow felt worse than if he had been angry. My mother kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, but though I wasn't sure if she was sad about losing her mother-in-law or upset about the will. But Derek looked at me with something I'd never seen before. Pure hatred. "You probably manipulated her," he hissed as we left the lawyer's office. "Spent all that time playing the sweet granddaughter while she was losing her mind." "She wasn't losing her mind," I shot back, finding my voice. "And I never asked her for anything." "You didn't have to ask. You just had to be yourself, pathetic and needy. She felt sorry for you." I should have walked away then. I should have just gotten in my car and driven off. But something in me snapped. "You're just mad because for once in your life, you didn't get everything handed to you. Maybe if you'd actually visited Grandma more than twice a year, she would have left you something too." His jaw clenched. "Watch yourself, Cream." Or what? He stepped closer, and for a second, I saw something dangerous flicker in his eyes. Then he turned and walked away, climbing into his black BMW and peeling out of the parking lot. I told myself it was just anger. Just bruised ego. Derek had always been competitive, always had to win. This was just another loss he'd have to get over. I had no idea how wrong I was. The next few weeks were tense. I started the process of moving my things out of the family house, spending weekends driving down to Cape Cod to clean up the property and make plans. The estate was beautiful, but needed work. Fresh paint, updated fixtures, some landscaping. I started sketching out ideas, thinking maybe I could turn the guest cottage into a design studio. Derek barely spoke to me. When we were in the same room, he'd look right through me like I was invisible. My parents tried to play peacemaker, suggesting maybe I could work something out with Derek, perhaps sell him a portion of the property or let the family company manage it. I said, "It's my property. Grandma left it to me." Things came to a head on Memorial Day weekend. My parents were hosting their annual barbecue at the house, and despite everything, I'd agreed to come. Maybe I was naive. Maybe I thought food and sunshine and relatives would somehow make everything normal again.
Derek had been drinking. I could tell by the way he was laughing too loud at our uncle's jokes, by the slight sway in his stance. I tried to avoid him, staying on the opposite side of the yard, helping my aunt with the dessert table. But around 8 o'clock, as the party was winding down and guests were leaving, I headed inside to use the bathroom. The house was mostly empty, with everyone still outside. I'd just finished washing my hands when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Derek was standing at the top of the stairs, blocking my path. "We need to talk," he said. His words were slightly slurred, and I could smell the beer on his breath from 6 feet away. "Not now," I said. "You've been drinking." "I'm fine," he snapped. "I want to talk about the Cape Cod property." "There's nothing to talk about. Just sell it to me. I'll give you a fair price." "It's not for sale." His expression darkened. "Everything's for sale, Cream. You're just being stubborn." "I'm following Grandma's wishes. She wanted me to have it." "She was 91 years old. She didn't know what she was doing." "Yes, she did, and the answer is no." I tried to move past him, but he grabbed my arm. "Let go of me," I said, my heart starting to pound. "You think you're so special. You think because Grandma gave you some house that you're better than me? You're nothing. You've always been nothing." "Get out of my way, Derek." For a moment, we just stood there in the hallway, his hand still gripping my arm, both of us at the top of the steep staircase that led down to the main foyer. What happened next took maybe 3 seconds, but I remember it in excruciating slow motion. Derek's face twisted with rage. His hand moved from my arm to my shoulder, and then he pushed. Not a little shove, a hard, deliberate push with both hands. I stumbled backward, my feet losing contact with the floor. I remember the sensation of falling, of tumbling, of my body hitting the sharp edges of the wooden stairs. I remember the sound, a sickening crack that I would later learn was my spine fracturing at the T12 vertebra. I remember landing at the bottom of the stairs, sprawled on the marble floor of the foyer. And I remember looking up to see Derek's face at the top of the staircase, his eyes wide, his hand over his mouth. Then everything went dark. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I woke up to the sterile smell of antiseptic and the steady beeping of machines. My mouth felt like sandpaper, and there was a heaviness in my body that I'd never experienced before. Not the tiredness after a long day, but something deeper, something fundamentally wrong. The hospital room slowly came into focus. White walls, fluorescent lights that hurt my eyes, a TV mounted in the corner playing some daytime talk show with the sound off. My mother was sitting in a chair beside my bed, her eyes closed, her head tilted at an awkward angle like she'd fallen asleep sitting up. I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. I tried to move my hand to reach for the water cup on the bedside table, and that's when the panic set in. My hand moved. My arm responded to my brain's commands, but from my waist down, nothing. Absolutely nothing. I couldn't feel my legs. I couldn't wiggle my toes. It was like the lower half of my body had simply ceased to exist, disconnected from the rest of me like a phone line that had been cut. "Mom?" I managed to croak out, and her eyes snapped open. "Cream! Oh, thank God you're awake." She was on her feet instantly, pressing the call button for the nurse, her hands fluttering nervously. "You're okay, sweetheart. You're going to be okay." But I could see in her eyes that I wasn't okay. Not even close. The doctors came in, Dr. Patricia Mendez, a neurosurgeon with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, and Dr. James Chen, a specialist in spinal cord injuries. They explained what had happened using careful, measured words that I'm sure they'd practiced delivering to patients like me 100 times before. I had sustained a spinal cord injury at the T12 level. That's the 12th thoracic vertebra, right where your rib cage ends and your lower back begins. The fall had caused a burst fracture with fragments of bone compressing my spinal cord. They'd performed emergency surgery to stabilize my spine and remove the bone fragments, but the damage had already been done. "Will I walk again?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer from the way they were looking at me. Dr. Mendez took a breath. "Right now you have what we call a complete spinal cord injury at T12. That means there's no motor or sensory function below the level of injury. You have full use of your upper body, your arms, your hands, but your legs, I'm so sorry, Cream. The likelihood of recovering function is very small." The words hit me like a physical blow. Wheelchair, paralyzed, permanent. The terms swirled around in my head, refusing to make sense. "There's a chance though, right?" my mother said desperately. "People recover from these things all the time. I've read stories." "Every injury is different," Dr. Chen interjected gently. "We'll know more in the coming weeks as the swelling reduces. Some patients do experience some return of sensation or movement, but Mrs. Johnson, it's important to be realistic. Cream's injury is severe." I spent 3 weeks in that hospital. 3 weeks of learning a completely new way to exist in the world. Physical therapists taught me how to transfer from the bed to a wheelchair. Occupational therapists showed me adaptive equipment I'd need for daily tasks. A psychologist named Dr. Raymond stopped by twice a week to talk about processing trauma and accepting a new normal. But nobody wanted to talk about what had actually caused my fall. My father had been the one to find me at the bottom of the stairs. According to the story everyone kept repeating, I'd tripped and fallen while coming downstairs during the party. A tragic accident. Such terrible luck. These old houses with their steep staircases, you know how dangerous they can be.
Derek visited once, 3 days after I woke up. He stood in the doorway of my hospital room like he was afraid to come any closer, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Hey," he said quietly. "Get out," I responded. "Cream, I'm sorry. I never meant get out." He opened his mouth to say something else, then thought better of it. He left, and I didn't see him again for weeks. But here's what nobody knew. I remembered everything. The argument, his hands on my shoulders, the deliberate push, the rage in his eyes. I told the police detective who came to take my statement, a tired-looking man named Detective Marcus Riley, who seemed more interested in wrapping up paperwork than investigating. But when I explained that my brother had pushed me, that it wasn't an accident, he exchanged a look with my parents that I couldn't quite read. "Miss Johnson, you suffered a traumatic head injury in addition to your spinal injury. Sometimes memories of traumatic events can be confused. Your family says you were alone at the top of the stairs when you fell." I wasn't confused. Derek pushed me.
My mother had started crying. My father put his arm around her shoulders and cleared his throat. "Kareem, sweetheart, you've been through an enormous trauma. Derek wasn't even upstairs when it happened. He was outside with the other guests." "That's not true." "Multiple people saw him," my father continued. "Your uncle, your cousins, the neighbors. He was helping pack up the grill when we heard you fall." I looked from my father to my mother to the detective, and I realized what was happening. They were protecting Derek, creating an alibi, turning my assault into an accident. "So that's it," I said, my voice rising. "He pushes me down the stairs, I end up paralyzed, and everyone just pretends it didn't happen?" Detective Riley had closed his notebook. "Without evidence to suggest otherwise, and with multiple witnesses placing your brother elsewhere, I have to conclude this was an unfortunate accident. I'm very sorry for what you're going through, Miss Johnson." He left, and I was stuck in that hospital bed, unable to walk, unable to get justice, unable to make anyone believe me. The betrayal was almost worse than the injury itself. My own parents, people who were supposed to protect me, supposed to believe me, had chosen Derek over me. They'd constructed an elaborate lie to save their golden child from the consequences of what he'd done. I spent those 3 weeks in the hospital planning. Physical therapy sessions became strategy sessions in my mind. While I learned to navigate the world in a wheelchair, I was also figuring out how to navigate the legal and social maze that stood between me and the truth. My parents wanted me to move back home after I was discharged. They'd already started talking about converting the downstairs den into a bedroom for me, installing ramps, making the house accessible. "It makes the most sense. You'll need help, Kareem. You can't possibly manage on your own." But I could see what they were really doing. They wanted to keep me close, keep me quiet, keep me dependent on them so I wouldn't make waves or cause problems for Derek. "I'm going to the Cape Cod house," I told them. My father frowned. "That house isn't accessible. There are stairs, narrow doorways." "Then I'll make it accessible. It's my house. I'm going there." "Don't be ridiculous," my mother said. "You need family around you." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. A woman who would sacrifice one child to protect another. A woman who valued reputation and appearances over truth. "No," I said quietly. "I really don't." The social worker assigned to my case, a compassionate woman named Teresa Blackwell, helped me coordinate everything. She connected me with contractors who specialized in accessibility modifications, found me a home health aide to help with initial daily tasks, and provided resources for independent living with a spinal cord injury. My parents were furious, but there was nothing they could do. I was 22 years old, legally an adult, and the Cape Cod property was mine. On a humid day in late June, exactly 5 weeks after my fall, I left Massachusetts General Hospital in a wheelchair van, my few possessions packed in boxes, heading toward the one place that still felt like mine. The Cape Cod house sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by beach roses and rugosa bushes. The ocean was visible through the gaps in the trees, a stripe of blue in the distance. The contractors had worked fast. There was now a ramp leading to the front door, and they'd widened the doorways on the first floor. As the van pulled up and I saw the house, my house, the gift my grandmother had left me, something shifted inside me. The grief and anger that had been consuming me for weeks crystallized into something else: determination. My brother had tried to destroy me. My family had tried to bury the truth. They thought I would just disappear quietly to Cape Cod and fade away, the embarrassing reminder of Derek's crime tucked safely out of sight. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I was going to get justice. I was going to make Derek pay for what he'd done, and I was going to do it in a way that none of them saw coming. The game, as they say, was on.
Okay, I said slowly. How does that help us? Because therapists keep notes, and in Massachusetts, if there's reason to believe a patient poses a danger to themselves or others, certain information can be subpoenaed. I have a contact, someone who knows Derek's therapist socially. Apparently, Derek's been talking about the incident with his sister, expressing guilt, remorse, talking about what happened in ways that don't match the official story. My pulse quickened. Can we get access to those sessions? Not directly, but if we file a civil suit against Derek for assault and battery, we can subpoena the records as part of discovery. And if those records contain what I think they contain, his own words will convict him, I finished. Marcus smiled. Exactly. I hired a lawyer the next day. Her name was Jennifer Hoffman, a personal injury attorney out of Boston with a reputation for taking on difficult cases and winning. She was in her 40s, professionally dressed in a way that screamed competence, and she didn't waste time on pleasantries. Here's what we're looking at, she said during our first meeting at her downtown office. We file a civil suit against Derek for assault and battery causing permanent injury. We're not going criminal because the DA won't touch this without more evidence, but civil has a lower burden of proof. We only need to show preponderance of evidence, more likely than not that he did it. And we use the therapist's notes as evidence, I said. Among other things, we also have the PI's findings, the inconsistencies in the witness statements, your medical records, and your testimony. We paint a picture of a jealous, violent man who assaulted his sister and then hid behind family money and influence. What are we asking for? Jennifer didn't blink. Compensatory damages for medical expenses, lost wages, pain and suffering, and loss of quality of life. We're also asking for punitive damages because of the egregious nature of the assault and the subsequent cover-up. All told, I'd say we're looking at somewhere between $5 and $8 million. The number took my breath away. Will we get it? If we win, yes. Your injuries are catastrophic and permanent. The economic impact alone, medical care for the rest of your life, accessibility modifications, adaptive equipment, that's millions of dollars. Add in the pain and suffering, the emotional trauma, the loss of physical capability, a jury will be sympathetic. When do we file? She smiled. How does next week sound? The lawsuit hit the Johnson family like a bomb. I'd expected anger, but what I got was shock. My mother called within hours of the papers being served, her voice shaking. How could you do this? He's your brother, Cream. This is family. He pushed me down the stairs, Mom. He paralyzed me, and you covered it up. It was an accident. You're confused, you're angry, but this lawsuit is going to destroy this family. No, I said quietly. Derek destroyed this family when he pushed me. You destroyed it when you chose to protect him instead of me. I'm just making sure he finally faces consequences." She hung up. My father sent a text. "You're making a terrible mistake. We'll fight this." Derek didn't contact me at all. But I knew he was scared, and he should have been, because I wasn't the helpless victim lying at the bottom of the stairs anymore. I was Cream Johnson, and I was coming for everything he'd taken from me.
Derek hired the most expensive defense attorney money could buy, a man named Lawrence Castellano who specialized in defending wealthy people from consequences. He wore $1,000 suits, drove a Mercedes, and had a reputation for burying opposing counsel in paperwork and procedural motions. Our first court appearance was in late November, a cold Tuesday morning when the wind off Boston Harbor cut right through your coat. Jennifer wheeled me into the Suffolk County Courthouse, and I saw Derek for the first time since that brief hospital visit months ago. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He avoided looking at me, keeping his gaze fixed on his lawyer or the floor or anywhere else. My parents sat behind him in the gallery, my mother clutching a tissue, my father's jaw set in a hard line. Judge Margaret Rivera presided over the preliminary hearing. She was a stern-looking woman in her 60s who ran her courtroom with military precision. After both sides presented their opening arguments, she scheduled the case for trial in March, 4 months away. This court takes allegations of assault causing severe bodily harm very seriously, Judge Rivera said, looking directly at Derek. Discovery will proceed as outlined. Both parties are ordered to comply fully and promptly. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, both attorneys said in unison. The real battle, though, wasn't happening in the courtroom. It was happening behind the scenes, in depositions and document requests and the slow, grinding machinery of the legal system. Jennifer subpoenaed everything. Derek's financial records, his employment files, his communications, my parents' phone records from the day of the incident, witness statements from every single person who'd been at that Memorial Day party, and most importantly, those therapy session notes. Lawrence Castellano fought it every step of the way. He filed motion after motion to block the subpoenas, claiming therapist-patient privilege, arguing that the financial records were irrelevant, insisting that we were on a fishing expedition with no real evidence. But Judge Rivera wasn't having it. She granted most of our discovery requests, including limited access to Derek's therapy records. The therapist would be required to turn over any notes related to discussions of violence, the incident with me, or statements about causing harm. While we waited for those documents, Marcus Webb continued digging, and what he found was fascinating. Derek's life had fallen apart after I filed the lawsuit. The DUI in July was just the beginning. In August, he'd gotten into a physical altercation at a bar in Cambridge. Charges were dropped, but there was a police report. In September, he'd been passed over for a promotion at the family company, and my father had quietly reduced his responsibilities. He's spiraling, Marcus told me during one of our check-ins. The guilt is eating him alive, even if he won't admit it publicly. People who know him say he's drinking more, becoming erratic, paranoid. Good, I said, and I meant it. But Marcus looked at me with something like concern. Kareem, you need to be careful. A cornered animal is dangerous. If Derek feels like he has nothing left to lose, what's he going to do? Push me down another flight of stairs? I'm already in a wheelchair. I'm serious. People who are desperate do desperate things. Watch your back. I appreciated the concern, but I wasn't scared of Derek anymore. I'd been through the worst thing he could do to me and survived. What else was there to fear? The therapy notes arrived in December, just as the first snow started falling on Cape Cod. Jennifer called me immediately. She said, "You need to see these," her voice tight with excitement. "Can you come to the office?" I made the drive to Boston the next day. Jennifer spread the documents across her conference table, typed notes, some redacted but enough visible to tell the story. Session from August 15th. Client expressed feelings of intense guilt regarding incident with sister. States he didn't mean for it to go that far, but was so angry in the moment. Reports difficulty sleeping, recurring nightmares about the incident. Session from September 22nd. Client discussed family pressure to maintain version of events that differs from his memory.
conflict between desire to come clean and fear of legal and social consequences. Reports increase in alcohol use to cope with cognitive dissonance. Session from October 8th. Client admitted that he pushed her during argument, but claims it was not that hard and she fell worse than he intended. Expressed frustration that everyone thinks it was an accident when he knows the truth. Jennifer looked at me, her eyes bright. This is it. This is him admitting he pushed you, in his own words, documented by a licensed professional. Castellano is going to lose his mind when he sees this. She was right. When we submitted the therapy notes as evidence, Derek's legal team went into overdrive. They filed an emergency motion claiming the notes were taken out of context, that they represented the confused ramblings of a man under severe emotional stress, that the therapist had no medical basis for including those specific statements. Judge Rivera scheduled a special hearing to address the admissibility of the evidence. The courtroom was packed, not just with our families, but with reporters. Somehow the case had leaked to the media, and suddenly I was woman in wheelchair, Sue's brother who allegedly pushed her downstairs.
The hearing was intense. Derek's therapist, Dr. Alan Montgomery, was called to testify. He was a mild-mannered man in his 50s who clearly didn't want to be there, but who also took his professional responsibilities seriously. Did Mr. Johnson make the statements attributed to him in these notes? Jennifer asked. Yes, Dr. Montgomery said quietly. And were these statements made freely, without coercion or influence? Yes, Mr. Johnson came to these conclusions himself through our therapeutic process. In your professional opinion, were these statements truthful? Castellano shot to his feet. Objection! Calls for speculation! Overruled, Judge Rivera said. The witness is qualified to assess his patient's truthfulness. Answer the question, doctor. Dr. Montgomery took a breath. In my professional opinion, yes. Mr. Johnson was being truthful when he described pushing his sister during their argument. He showed all the signs of genuine remorse and guilt, which is consistent with someone who has actually committed an act they regret. The courtroom erupted. My mother started crying loudly. My father stormed out. Derek sat frozen, his face pale, while Castellano whispered urgently in his ear. Judge Rivera banged her gavel. Order! I will have order in this courtroom. When things settled down, she made her ruling. The therapy notes will be admitted as evidence. The trial will proceed as scheduled in March. This hearing is adjourned. As Jennifer wheeled me out of the courtroom, reporters swarmed us with questions and camera flashes, but I kept my eyes forward, saying nothing. I didn't need to say anything. The evidence spoke for itself. That night, alone in my Cape Cod house with the winter wind howling outside, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not just hope for winning the lawsuit, but hope that the truth would finally come out, that Derek would face consequences, that justice might actually exist. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Cream. It was Derek's voice, rough and desperate. We need to talk. No, we don't. Have your lawyer call my lawyer. Please, just listen. I can't. This trial, it's going to destroy everything. Mom's falling apart. Dad's talking about selling the business. Our family is imploding. You should have thought of that before you pushed me down the stairs. I know I did it. You were right, okay? You were right all along. I was drunk and angry, and I pushed you, and I've regretted it every single day since. But if this goes to trial, you'll have to face what you did. Yes, that's exactly what's going to happen. What if we settled? What if I admitted everything publicly and we settled outside of court? You'd get your money, I'd take responsibility, and we could all move on. I laughed, a bitter sound. You want to buy your way out of this? Just like everything else in your life. No, I want to make this right, or as right as it can be. Please, Cream, tell me what you want. I thought about it. What did I want? Money? I was getting that either way. A public admission? That would be satisfying, but was it enough? I'll think about it, I finally said. But Derek, Whatever happens next, you brought this on yourself. Remember that. I hung up before he could respond. Jennifer called me first thing the next morning. Did Derek contact you last night? How did you know? Because Castellano just called me. They want to settle. They're offering $4 million and a public statement taking responsibility for your injuries. What do you think? Jennifer was quiet for a moment. Financially, it's a decent offer. A trial is always a gamble, and $4 million is nothing to sneeze at. But Cream, if we go to trial and win, we could get more. Plus, there's something satisfying about making him sit through a public trial, having every detail aired in court. What would you do? That's not my decision to make. This is your life, your case. What outcome would give you peace? I stared out my window at the gray Atlantic Ocean, thinking about justice and revenge and closure and whether any of it actually mattered. The answer, I realized, was more complicated than I had thought.
I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room watching the moonlight reflect off the ocean, thinking about Derek's voice on the phone, the desperation in it, the fear. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, he sounded genuinely broken. Part of me, the part that remembered being kids together, playing in the backyard, sharing secrets, felt a twinge of something that might have been sympathy. But then I'd shift my weight in my wheelchair, feel the dead numbness below my waist, and that sympathy would evaporate like morning fog. I called Jennifer at 7 in the morning. "I'm not taking the settlement," I said. There was a pause on the other end. "You're sure? $4 million is a lot of money, Cream." "It's not about the money anymore. It was never really about the money. I want a trial. I want a jury to hear what he did. I want it on record, official, public record, that Derek Johnson assaulted his sister and ruined her life. A private settlement with a carefully worded statement isn't enough." "Okay," Jennifer said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Then we go to trial. I'll let Castellano know." The next 3 months were a blur of preparation. Jennifer and her team worked around the clock, preparing exhibits, coaching me on testimony, anticipating every argument Castellano might make. We did mock trials where Jennifer's associates played the defense team, throwing hostile questions at me to prepare for cross-examination. "He's going to try to paint you as vindictive," Jennifer warned me during one prep session. "He'll say you're bitter about not being the favorite child, that you're twisting an unfortunate accident into something sinister because you can't accept what happened. You need to stay calm, stick to the facts, and don't let him rattle you." "I can handle it," I said. "I know you can, but it's going to be hard. This is your brother, your family. Testifying against them in front of a jury and the media, it's going to take everything you have." She wasn't exaggerating. The trial began on March 15th, the first real warm day of spring. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and cameras. The story had grown beyond Boston. National news outlets were covering it as the sibling betrayal case, dissecting family dynamics and privilege, and the question of whether wealthy people really did get away with everything. Jury selection took 2 days. We ended up with 7 women and 5 men, ages ranging from mid-20s to late 60s. A diverse group, a school teacher, a retired postal worker, a software engineer, a nurse, others. They looked at me with curiosity and sympathy as I wheeled myself to the plaintiff's table. Derek sat across the aisle with his legal team, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. Our eyes met once, briefly, and he looked away first. Jennifer's opening statement was devastating. She laid out the entire story, the inheritance that sparked Derek's jealousy, the confrontation at the top of the stairs, the deliberate push, the family conspiracy to cover it up. She showed photos of my injuries, medical records detailing the catastrophic damage to my spine, expert testimony about what my life would be like moving forward. "This isn't a story about an accident," she told the jury. "This is a story about a man who was so consumed by jealousy and entitlement that he physically attacked his own sister and then hid behind his family's money and influence while she paid the price. Cream Johnson will never walk again because of what Derek Johnson did to her. And it's time he faced justice." Castellano's opening was predictably different. He painted Derek as a devoted brother overwhelmed with guilt over a tragic accident. He claimed the therapy notes were taken out of context, that Derek's admissions were actually him processing false memories created by family pressure and media scrutiny. "My client has been vilified in the press," Castellano said smoothly. "He's been turned into a monster by a sister who, understandably distraught over her injuries, needs someone to blame. But wanting something to be true doesn't make it true. The evidence will show that this was a terrible accident, nothing more." The prosecution's case took a week. Jennifer called witness after witness. The paramedics who'd responded described the scene and my father's strange insistence that it was an accident before anyone had suggested otherwise. Marcus Webb testified about the inconsistencies in the alibi, the witnesses who couldn't actually confirm Derek's whereabouts during the crucial minutes. Dr. Mendez, my neurosurgeon, explained the nature of my injuries with devastating clinical precision. The jury looked horrified as she described the spinal cord compression, the surgery, the permanent paralysis. "In your medical opinion," Jennifer asked, "are these injuries consistent with a simple fall downstairs?" "They could be," Dr. Mendez admitted, "but the force required to cause the specific pattern of injury, the T12 burst fracture, suggests significant velocity and impact. A simple trip and fall typically wouldn't generate this kind of force. Something or someone would need to propel the victim with considerable energy." Then came Dr. Montgomery's testimony about the therapy sessions. Castellano tried desperately to discredit him, but the therapist held firm. Yes, Derek had admitted to pushing me. Yes, he'd expressed guilt about lying. Yes, in Dr. Montgomery's professional opinion, Derek was being truthful about his actions. The courtroom was silent when Dr. Montgomery stepped down. I could see several jurors looking at Derek with expressions that ranged from disgust to pity. But the most powerful moment came when I took the stand. Jennifer led me through my testimony gently. I described my relationship with Derek growing up, the inheritance, the party, the confrontation. When we got to the actual push, my voice remained steady, even as I relived the worst moment of my life. "What happened at the top of those stairs, Cream?" Jennifer asked. I said clearly. Derek grabbed my shoulders with both hands. He looked me in the eyes, and he pushed me hard, deliberate, backward down the stairs. "Are you certain it was deliberate?"
Completely certain. This wasn't a bump or an accident. He meant to hurt me. Then came Castellano's cross-examination. He was good. I had to give him that. He tried every angle he could think of. "Isn't it true you suffered a traumatic brain injury in the fall?" "A mild concussion, yes." "And couldn't that concussion have affected your memory of events?" "No. My memory of what happened is crystal clear." "You inherited a valuable property that your brother wanted. Isn't it possible you've convinced yourself that he pushed you because it gives you leverage in family disputes over that property?" "I don't need to convince myself of anything. I know what happened." "You've had months to think about this, to replay the event in your mind. Isn't it possible you've constructed a narrative that fits your emotional needs rather than objective reality?" I took a breath, meeting his eyes. "Mr. Castellano, I wake up every morning unable to feel my legs. I have to transfer myself from my bed to a wheelchair just to start my day. I will never walk again, never run on a beach, never dance at a wedding. I live with the consequences of what my brother did. Every single moment of every single day. Trust me, I haven't constructed any narrative. I'm living the truth. The jury looked moved. Even Castellano seemed to realize he wasn't making headway. The defense's case was weaker. They called character witnesses who testified that Derek was a good person, successful in business, kind to his friends. They brought in their own medical expert who suggested my injuries could have resulted from a fall. They put Derek's drinking buddy on the stand to claim Derek had been devastated by my accident and desperately wanted to help me. But they didn't put Derek himself on the stand, and that spoke volumes. If he'd really been innocent, if this had truly been an accident, wouldn't he have testified? Wouldn't he have looked the jury in the eyes and told them his version of events? His silence was damning. Closing arguments came on a Friday afternoon. Jennifer was brilliant, weaving together all the evidence into a compelling narrative of violence and lies and a young woman's fight for justice. Castellano did his best to create reasonable doubt, but you could feel the energy in the room shifting. Judge Rivera gave the jury their instructions, and they filed out to deliberate. The wait was excruciating. Hours passed. Jennifer and I sat in a conference room near the courtroom, drinking bad coffee, and trying not to think about what was happening behind those closed doors. "How long is normal?" I asked. "There's no normal," Jennifer said. "Quick verdicts can go either way. Long deliberations can mean anything. We just have to wait." Night fell. The jury was sequestered in a hotel, would resume deliberations in the morning. I went back to my hotel room. I'd been staying in Boston for the duration of the trial and tried to sleep. But all I could think about was those 12 people holding my future in their hands. The call came at 10:47 a.m. on Saturday morning. The jury had reached a verdict. We rushed back to the courthouse. The gallery was packed again, reporters jockeying for position, my parents sitting grim-faced on Derek's side of the room. I noticed my mother wouldn't look at me. Derek looked terrified. His hands were shaking as he stood when the jury entered. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Rivera asked. "We have, Your Honor." The forewoman, the schoolteacher, a woman in her 50s named Patricia Dalton. "In the matter of Johnson versus Johnson on the charge of assault and battery, how do you find?" Patricia Dalton looked directly at Derek. "We find for the plaintiff."
Winning the trial should have felt triumphant. Instead, as I left the courthouse that day with reporters shouting questions and cameras flashing, I felt hollow, empty, like I'd been fighting so hard for so long that I'd forgotten what peace actually felt like. The media frenzy was immediate and overwhelming. My story was everywhere. Cable news, morning shows, social media, podcasts. Everyone had an opinion about the Johnson sibling case. Some praised me as a brave survivor who'd stood up to family corruption. Others accused me of tearing my family apart over money. The internet, as always, was a cesspool of both support and vicious attacks. I stopped reading the comments after someone suggested I'd thrown myself down the stairs for attention. Jennifer handled the media requests, declining almost all of them. "Let the verdict speak for itself," she advised. "You don't owe anyone your story or your trauma for entertainment." But the legal battle wasn't quite over. Castellano immediately filed an appeal claiming judicial errors and improper admission of evidence. It would be months, maybe years, before that process played out. In the meantime, Derek's assets were frozen pending the appeal, which meant I wouldn't see a penny of that $8 million anytime soon. "This is standard procedure," Jennifer assured me. "They're just delaying the inevitable. The verdict was solid. The appeal won't succeed." I nodded, but part of me wondered if I'd ever actually see that money, or if Derek would find some way to weasel out of paying. The real drama, though, was happening within my family. 3 days after the verdict, my father showed up at my Cape Cod house unannounced.
I heard his car on the gravel driveway and watched through the window as he climbed out of his Mercedes, looking older than I'd ever seen him. I considered not answering the door, but curiosity won out. "What do you want?" I said when I opened the door, not inviting him inside. He stood on my newly installed ramp, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. "I wanted to talk to you, away from your mother, away from lawyers, just us." "There is no just us anymore. You made sure of that when you lied to the police." "Cream," he stopped, struggling with words. "I made mistakes. I know that now. My mother and I, we thought we were protecting the family, keeping things together. You were protecting Derek. There's a difference. He's our son, and I'm your daughter." The words burst out of me, months of pain and betrayal rising to the surface. "I'm your daughter, and he nearly killed me. And you chose him. You looked the detective in the eye and lied. You sat in that courtroom and supported him while I fought for my life. So don't come here now talking about family." My father's shoulders sagged. For the first time in my life, I saw him cry. Not big dramatic sobs, but quiet tears that rolled down his cheeks unchecked. "You're right," he said softly. "We failed you. I failed you. And I don't know if you can ever forgive me for that. But I need you to know I'm sorry. I'm so, so sorry." I wanted to slam the door in his face. I wanted to scream at him to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I'd endured. But looking at this broken man on my doorstep, I just felt tired. "I can't do this right now," I said. "I need you to leave." Can we talk sometime when you're ready?" "Maybe. I don't know. Just go, Dad." He nodded, wiping his eyes, and walked back to his car. I watched him drive away and then sat in my living room staring at nothing for an hour. The cracks in the Johnson family empire were spreading wider. Through Marcus Webb, who I'd kept on retainer, I learned that my parents' real estate business was struggling. The trial had brought unwanted scrutiny to their practices, and several business partners had quietly distanced themselves. Properties weren't selling, deals were falling through. But the most dramatic implosion was Derek himself. In May, 2 months after the verdict, he was arrested for aggravated assault. He'd gotten into a fight at a bar in downtown Boston, broken a man's jaw, and been taken away in handcuffs. The victim was pressing charges, and with Derek's history now public knowledge, the DA wasn't offering any deals. My mother called me sobbing. "She have to help him," she begged. "This is your fault. If you hadn't sued him, if you hadn't dragged him through that trial, he wouldn't be falling apart like this." "My fault?" I said incredulously. "Mom, Derek pushed me down the stairs. Everything that's happened since is a consequence of his choice, not mine. He's going to prison, Cream. Your brother is going to prison." "Good. Maybe he'll finally face real consequences for his actions." She hung up on me, and we haven't spoken since. Derek did end up taking a plea deal. 18 months in a minimum security facility, plus anger management courses and probation. It wasn't much, but it was something. The golden child who'd never faced consequences for anything was finally being held accountable. I wish I could say it felt satisfying. Mostly it just felt sad. While Derek's life fell apart, mine was slowly coming back together. The appeal process dragged on, but Jennifer was confident, and I'd learned to trust her judgment. In the meantime, I focused on the things I could control. My graphic design business was thriving. The media attention, despite its ugliness, had brought visibility. Companies reached out wanting to work with me, drawn by both my talent and my story. By summer, I was turning down projects because I had too much work. I hired an assistant, a recent design school graduate named Maya Chen, who was brilliant and organized and didn't treat me like I was fragile because of my wheelchair. We set up a proper office in the guest cottage, complete with state-of-the-art equipment and a killer view of the ocean.
"This is my dream setup," Maya said on her first day. "You're basically living and working in paradise." She was right. Slowly, the Cape Cod house had transformed from a refuge to a home. I'd made friends in town, other small business owners, people at my gym who didn't know or care about my family drama, the woman who ran the coffee shop where I worked most mornings. I'd even started dating. Nothing serious, just coffee dates and casual dinners with a marine biologist named Alex Brennan, who I'd met at a local accessibility advocacy meeting. He was kind, funny, and treated my wheelchair like the mobility aid it was rather than some tragic symbol. I don't want to be anyone's inspiration porn, I told him on our third date. I'm just a person who happens to use a wheelchair. I know, he'd said simply. That's why I asked you out. You're interesting and talented, and you make me laugh. The wheelchair is just part of the package. It was refreshing to be seen as a whole person, rather than a victim or a headline. In August, 18 months after I'd filed the lawsuit, the appeals court issued their ruling. They upheld the original verdict in its entirety. Derek's final appeal was denied. The $8 million was mine. Jennifer called with the news while I was working on a logo design for a sustainable clothing company. It's over, she said, really over. Derek's accounts will be unfrozen and he'll have 90 days to pay the full amount. I thanked her, hung up, and sat staring at my computer screen. $8 million. More money than I'd ever imagined having. Enough to cover my medical expenses for life, to expand my business, to live comfortably without worrying about the cost of adaptive equipment or accessible housing. But the money felt almost beside the point. What mattered more was the vindication. The official recognition that I'd been telling the truth all along, that Derek had assaulted me and justice had finally caught up with him. That night, I sat on my deck watching the sunset over the Atlantic, a glass of wine in my hand. My phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from Jennifer, from Marcus, from friends and supporters, but there was one message that stood out. It was from an unknown number. You won. I hope you're happy. I hope it was worth destroying our family. Derek. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. Because here's what Derek still didn't understand. He'd destroyed our family the moment he decided his jealousy was worth more than my safety. He'd destroyed it when he pushed me down those stairs. Everything that came after, the lawsuit, the trial, the consequences, those were just the truth finally coming to light. I wasn't the one who broke our family. I was just the one who refused to help cover it up. September arrived with cool breezes and changing leaves. The payment came through, all $8 million, deposited into an account Jennifer had set up. I paid off her legal fees, gave Marcus a generous bonus, and then sat down to figure out what came next. I donated $1 million to spinal cord injury research and rehabilitation programs. Another $1 million went to organizations supporting survivors of family violence. The rest I invested wisely, ensuring I'd be financially secure for life. But more than the money, I invested in myself. I enrolled in business courses to scale my design agency properly. I started speaking at conferences about adaptive design and accessibility in creative fields. I bought and renovated a second property on Cape Cod to turn into an accessible artist retreat for disabled creators. My life, which had seemed over when I woke up paralyzed in that hospital bed, was actually just beginning. Different than I'd planned, yes, but not less than. Just different. And Derek? Last I heard, he'd finished his jail sentence and moved to Florida, working some low-level sales job and living in a modest apartment. My parents had cut him off financially, their own business barely surviving. The golden child had lost his shine. I didn't feel triumphant about his downfall. I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied. I mostly just felt free. Free from the weight of family expectations. Free from the need to prove myself or fight for recognition. Free to build a life on my own terms, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I represented. Some people might say I was bitter, that I'd destroyed my family over revenge. But those people didn't understand. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had simply refused to be destroyed. And that made all the difference.
2 years after the verdict, I found myself back in Newton, Massachusetts for the first time since I'd left. Not for a family reunion or reconciliation, nothing that dramatic. I was there for a speaking engagement at Boston University, my alma mater, talking to design students about building careers after life-altering trauma. The campus looked exactly the same, yet everything felt different. I wheeled through familiar paths with a confidence I'd never had as a student, when I'd been so focused on proving myself, on escaping my family shadow. Now, ironically, I'd escaped it completely, just not in the way I'd imagined. After my talk, which was well received, with several students lining up to ask questions about adaptive design tools and accessibility in creative industries, I had a few hours before my train back to Cape Cod. On impulse, I found myself directing my wheelchair toward Newton. The old Johnson family house sat on its manicured corner lot, but there was a for sale sign planted in the front yard. I'd heard through Marcus that my parents were downsizing, the real estate empire having shrunk to almost nothing. Looking at the house now, this monument to success and appearances that had been my prison for so long, I felt nothing. No anger, no nostalgia, just a mild curiosity about who would buy it next. I took a photo on my phone, a moment of documentation, and was about to leave when I heard a voice. Cream. I turned. My mother stood on the sidewalk, carrying grocery bags, looking startled. She'd aged considerably, more gray in her hair, deeper lines around her eyes. She set down her bags carefully, like she was buying time to figure out what to say. "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I didn't know you were... we're moving next week to a condo in Brookline. I saw the sign." An awkward silence stretched between us. A car drove past. Somewhere, a dog barked. "You look good. Healthy. I've seen your website. Your business seems to be doing well." "It is." Another pause. She twisted her hands together, a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. "Your father and we've been going to therapy, couples therapy, and individual sessions too, trying to understand how we got everything so wrong." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out enabling one child while neglecting the other has consequences. Who knew?" Despite myself, I felt a small crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. "How is he?" "Dad." "He's struggling. We both are. The business is mostly gone. We're living off savings now, but honestly, I think losing everything was what we needed. We spent so long chasing success and protecting our reputation that we lost sight of what actually mattered." She looked at me directly for the first time. "We lost you, and we deserved it." I didn't disagree with her. She continued. "Derek writes to us sometimes, from Florida. He's in AA now, working through his steps. He says he wants to make amends eventually, when he's ready. I don't know if you'd ever want to hear from him, but..." "No," I said firmly. "I don't. Some things don't get fixed with an apology." She nodded, accepting this. "I understand. I wanted you to know that we know. Your father and we know we failed you. We know we chose wrong. And if you ever, someday, wanted to talk or have coffee or just, I don't know, we're here. Not in this house much longer, but we're here." I studied her face, looking for manipulation or guilt-tripping, but all I saw was genuine regret. It didn't erase what she'd done, but it was something. "Maybe," I said. "Someday. But not yet." "That's fair." She picked up her grocery bags. "I'm proud of you, Cream, for building a life, for standing up for yourself, for being stronger than we ever gave you credit for." "I had to be," I said quietly. "Nobody else was going to fight for me." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked toward the house. I watched her go, then wheeled back toward the tea station, feeling lighter somehow. Not forgiven, I wasn't ready for that,
but acknowledged, seen. The train ride back to Cape Cod gave me time to think about where I'd been and where I was going, about the cost of justice and whether it had been worth it. The answer was complicated. I'd won the lawsuit, gotten the money, seen Derek face consequences, but I'd also lost my family, spent 2 years consumed by anger and litigation, and would carry the physical consequences of Derek's violence for the rest of my life. Was it worth it? I honestly didn't know. But I know I had no other choice. Staying silent, accepting the lie, living with the injustice, that would have destroyed me in a different way, from the inside out. At least this way, I'd fought back. At least this way, I'd refused to be erased. When I got home that evening, Alex was waiting on my deck with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. We'd been together for over a year now, and he'd become a steady, comforting presence in my life. "How'd the talk go?" he asked as I transferred from my wheelchair to the deck chair beside me. "Really well. The students were engaged, asked great questions, and I ran into my mother afterward." His eyebrows rose. "How'd that go?" "Weird. Sad. She apologized. Sort of." "How do you feel about it?" I thought about it while opening my container of pad thai. Honestly, I don't know yet, but I think maybe eventually I might be able to have some kind of relationship with my parents again. Not like before, but something. Derek, though, that bridge is burned permanently. Alex nodded, understanding without needing more explanation. That was one of the things I loved about him. He didn't push, didn't try to fix things, just listened and supported whatever I needed. We ate dinner, watching the sun set over the ocean, the sky turning brilliant shades of orange and pink. My phone buzzed with an email, a new client inquiry, a tech startup wanting to rebrand. I made a mental note to review it with Maya tomorrow. Later that night, after Alex had gone home and I was getting ready for bed, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures from before the fall. Me standing on the beach, hiking with friends, dancing at a wedding. A different life. A different version of Cream Johnson.
I used to look at these photos with grief, mourning everything I'd lost. But tonight, I just felt separate from that person. Like she was someone I used to know. Someone I'd been, but not who I was anymore. The woman I'd become was harder, yes. More cautious about trusting people, quicker to spot manipulation and lies. But I was also stronger, more independent, more certain of my own worth. I'd built a successful business, created a beautiful home, surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared about me. I'd fought for justice and won. I'd survived. Not just survived, thrived. Would I trade it all to have my old life back? To walk again? To have a normal family? To not carry this trauma? The question was pointless. That wasn't an option. The only choice was between being destroyed by what had happened or building something new from the ruins. I'd chosen to build. My phone rang, startling me. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Cream Johnson? The voice was professional, female. Yes? This is Rachel Martinez from the National Spinal Cord Injury Association. I'm calling because we've been following your story, and we'd like to invite you to speak at our annual conference in Seattle this fall. We think your perspective on advocacy, justice, and life after injury would be incredibly valuable to our community. I smiled. I'd be honored. We talked details for a few minutes, then hung up. More speaking engagements, more opportunities to turn my experience into something meaningful, to help others who are going through what I'd been through. Maybe that was the real answer to whether it had all been worth it. Not the money or the verdict or seeing Derek punished, but this, the ability to take my pain and transform it into purpose. To be a voice for people who felt voiceless. To prove that disability wasn't the end of your story, just a different chapter. I transferred into bed, settling in with my book, a thriller I'd been working through all week. But before I started reading, I allowed myself one last reflective moment.
3 years ago, Derek pushed me down those stairs intending to hurt me, to punish me for threatening his position as the golden child. He'd succeeded in changing my life forever, just not in the way he intended. He tried to break me. Instead, he'd freed me. Freed me from toxic family dynamics, from living in someone else's shadow, from caring what people thought about me. He'd inadvertently given me the push, tragic, terrible, criminal push, that forced me to discover who I really was and what I was capable of. I was Cream Johnson. I was a successful business owner, a disability advocate, a survivor who'd refused to stay down. I was someone who'd fought for justice and won. Someone who'd built a life worth living on my own terms. And Derek? Derek was in Florida, alone with his regrets, living the small, diminished life he created for himself through his own choices and violence. Karma, it turned out, didn't always come like lightning. Sometimes it came slowly, methodically, stripping away everything you'd taken for granted until you were forced to face who you really were without the armor of privilege and family protection. Derek had made me pay with my ability to walk. But in the end, he'd paid with everything else. I opened my book and started reading. The sound of waves crashing outside my window, my comfortable bed and beautiful home around me, a future full of possibilities stretching ahead. The past couldn't be changed. Derek would always be the brother who pushed me down the stairs. I would always be the sister who survived and thrived despite him. But the future? That was all mine to write. And this time, I was the only author.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.